She had 2 hours until her wedding, and a telegram proving her groom planned to drug her at the altar and lock her in an asylum to steal her fortune. So she did the only thing a desperate heiress could do. She hid in a stranger's carriage and vanished into a Christmas snowstorm.
Hello. If you believe every underdog deserves to be seen and lifted up, your support means more than you know. Hitting 1,000 subscribers isn't just a number for us, it's what allows these real, hopeful stories to reach people who might desperately need them to stay motivated.
Christmas Eve should smell of cinnamon and promise, not chloroform and conspiracy. England, December 24th, 1878. Frost painted crystalline patterns across the windows of the Hertford townhouse in Mayfair, transforming London into a winter wonderland, but Miss Joana Steinfeld saw none of its beauty. She stood frozen in the rose drawing room, her wedding gown of ivory satin and seed pearls hanging behind her like a ghost, while in her trembling hands she clutched a telegram that Dorothy Brennan, her lady's maid, had intercepted from the Morning Post. The words blur before her eyes. Sanatorium prepared, stop physicians arrange, stop transfer, immediate post-ceremony, stop confirm Caldwell. Miss, you must read it carefully, Dorothy whispered, her Irish accent thick with fear, her weathered face pale as milk. I found it in his lordship's study, meant for Viscount Caldwell. There were others, miss. Letters discussing payment to physicians, arrangements with a private institution in Devon. Joanna's American accent thickened as terror seized her throat. Transfer immediate post-ceremony. She looked up at Dorothy, understanding dawning like a sickness. Dear God, they mean to lock me away the moment I say I do. 23 years she had lived, and in those years she had endured much. Her father's death in a railway accident 3 years ago, crushed between cars during an inspection of his own New York Central line. Her mother's swift remarriage to a British diplomat, desperate for security and status. The crossing to London last spring when her stepfather accepted a posting to the court of St. James. The announcement 6 months ago that she would marry Viscount Caldwell, a man whose cold charm had fooled everyone but her, whose hand on her arm left bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, whose eyes held the same ruthless calculation she had seen in the faces of men who tried to cheat her father in business deals. But this was beyond her darkest imaginings. The sanatorium, she breathed, the telegram slipping from her fingers. He'll have me declared insane, take control of my inheritance, and I'll simply disappear. $2 million, Dorothy. My father's railroad fortune. That's what this is about. Lord Hertford sold you, miss. Dorothy's voice shook with fury and grief. Sold you like cattle to settle his gambling debts. £15,000 he owed, and Viscount Caldwell paid it all in exchange for your hand. I heard them talking last week, laughing about it over brandy. Through the window, Joanna could see carriages beginning to arrive despite the thickening snow. The Haverford family, their daughters in Christmas finery. The Duchess of Surrey with her entourage. Early guests for the 3 o'clock ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square. The snowfall had intensified, the kind of storm that could bury London in white within hours, but the wedding would proceed. Caldwell had made that clear. Nothing would stop this ceremony. Nothing except her. I have to run, Joanna said, and the words sounded insane even to her own ears, but what choice remained? But where? Lord Hertford is my legal guardian until I marry or reach 25. Any respectable family would return me immediately. The law gives him absolute control. Then you go where they can't follow quickly. Dorothy moved with sudden purpose, pulling a traveling dress of dark green wool from the wardrobe. The storm will slow pursuit, buy you time. I have £40 saved, take it all. Head north, away from London, away from these devils. The plan was madness, certain doom. But as Joanna shed the wedding gown, feeling its weight fall away like chains breaking, she felt something she had not experienced in months since her stepfather first introduced her to Caldwell's reptilian smile. Hope, fragile as frost, foolish as prayer, but undeniably real. Your mother was kind to me once, Dorothy said quietly, helping Joanna into the simple traveling dress, arranging her dark hair into a modest, not beneath a plain bonnet. When I first came to New York, when I had nothing, she gave me work, treated me with dignity. I will not stand by and watch her daughter destroyed by men who see her as nothing more than a bank vault with a pulse. Tears blurred Joanna's vision. If they discover you, help me. I am an old woman, miss. I have lived my life. You have barely begun yours. Dorothy pressed the small purse into Joanna's hands. Now go. The servants' entrance. The household is chaos with wedding preparations. Cook is shouting about the breakfast. Footmen are carrying silver to the carriages for transport to the church. No one will notice one woman in a traveling cloak. They moved swiftly through the corridors Joanna had walked for 8 months. Past the morning room, where she had taken tea with Lord Pembroke's cold wife. Past the music room, where she had been forced to perform for Caldwell's inspection. Past the prison of propriety and control that had slowly suffocated her American independence. At the servants' entrance, Dorothy created her distraction, swaying dramatically against the doorframe with a theatrical gasp that sent 2 kitchen maids rushing to her aid. In the commotion, Joanna slipped through the door and into the biting December air. The mews behind the townhouse bustled with activity despite the storm. Grooms prepared carriages, their breath fogging in the cold. Coachmen stamped their feet, cursing the weather. Ostlers led horses through the thickening snow, struggling to maintain footing on the icy cobblestones. And there, like Providence itself, stood a magnificent carriage bearing an unfamiliar crest. A raven perched atop a stone tower, rendered in silver against black lacquer. The door stood slightly ajar, warm air escaping into the frozen afternoon, condensation fogging the windows from within. Behind her, clear as a death knell, Joanna heard Lord Pembroke's voice cutting through the snow-muffled air. Where is she? Where's my ward? The ceremony begins in 2 hours. Joanna did not think, did not plan, did not calculate consequences or consider alternatives. She simply ran. The carriage interior smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else, bergamot and winter air, masculine and expensive. Rich charcoal upholstery gleamed in the dim light. Polished brass fixtures reflected her terrified face. A fur blanket lay folded on the opposite seat. Joanna dove beneath the bench, pulling the blanket down to conceal herself, making her body as small as possible in the narrow space beneath. The fine dust of the floor covering filled her nose. Her dress caught on something sharp, tearing slightly, but she hardly noticed. "All set, my lord," she heard a coachman call from outside. "Though with this snow, we'll be lucky to reach Hertfordshire by nightfall. The Great North Road will be treacherous. Then we had best depart immediately," came a deep voice, distinctly British, educated, patient as winter itself. "I have no desire to spend Christmas stranded at an inn. Ravenscroft Hall awaits, and I intend to reach Yorkshire before the storm makes travel impossible." The carriage lurched into motion, wheels crunching on snow-covered cobblestones, and Miss Joana Steinfeld, who should have been married by sunset, who should have been drugged and transported to a Devon sanatorium by midnight, who should have disappeared into institutional darkness while Viscount Caldwell plundered her father's fortune, vanished into the storm. Hidden beneath the seat of an Earl's carriage, traveling toward a future she could not begin to imagine, with Christmas bells ringing mockingly in the distance, and her wedding gown lying discarded like a corpse in the Hertford townhouse. The last thing she heard before the carriage turned onto the main road was Dorothy's voice, raised in false distress, buying her precious minutes of escape. "Oh, my heart! Someone fetch the physician. I feel quite faint." Then there was only the sound of horses' hooves, the creak of carriage wheels, and the wild thunder of her own terrified heartbeat as London disappeared behind her into the swirling white. The journey became a blur of discomfort and terror. The carriage swayed and lurched over uneven roads, rapidly disappearing beneath accumulating snow. Joanna's legs went numb in the cramped space beneath the seat. Her back ached from the unnatural position, and dust mingled with fear made her throat raw. But she dared not move, dared not make a sound that might alert the Earl to her presence. Twice they slowed for other vehicles to pass, the drivers shouting warnings about the worsening conditions ahead. Once they stopped entirely, And Joanna heard the Earl's voice again, though she could not make out his words over the wind. Her heart hammered so violently she was certain it would give her away, each beat echoing like drums in the confined darkness. When the carriage finally rolled to a complete stop and she heard the unmistakable sounds of an inn-yard, horses being led away, ostlers calling for stalls, voices demanding hot wine and warm fires, Joanna faced a terrible choice. Should she reveal herself now, throw herself on the Earl's mercy in this public place? But what mercy could she expect from a man whose carriage she had invaded like a common thief? What if he knew Lord Pembroke? What if he simply returned her, as any man of honor would, delivering her directly into Caldwell's waiting hands? The decision was made for her when she heard footsteps approaching the carriage door. Heavy boots on packed snow. The door opened, admitting a blast of frigid air that made her shiver violently beneath the blanket. "Will you be taking a meal, my lord?" A servant's voice, respectful and concerned. "The Swan has a decent ordinary, and cook promises roast beef despite the holiday rush." "I shall take something quickly," came the Earl's reply, so close now that Joanna could almost feel the vibration of his voice. "We cannot afford delay. This storm will only worsen, and I mean to reach Ravenscroft before we are completely snowbound." The door closed again. Footsteps moved away. Joanna remained frozen in her hiding place, hardly daring to breathe. Through a gap in the blanket, she could see a sliver of the inn-yard through the window. The Swan, Hertfordshire. They had traveled perhaps 20 miles from London, maybe slightly more. Not far enough. Not nearly far enough if Caldwell was already organizing pursuit. Time crawled past with agonizing slowness. Her muscles screamed for movement. Thirst parched her throat. The cold seeped through her traveling dress despite the fur blanket, and she realized with growing horror that she might actually freeze in this position if the journey continued much longer. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely less than one, she heard the Earl returning. The carriage door opened again, and this time someone climbed inside, not to the driver's box above, but into the passenger compartment itself. Joanna pressed herself as far back as she could, her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle any sound. She could see his boots now through her narrow view. Fine black leather, expensive, well-made. Could see the hem of his greatcoat as he settled into the seat directly above her hiding place. The carriage lurched back into motion, and Joanna closed her eyes, offering desperate prayers to any power that might be listening. Let him not discover her. Let the storm not worsen beyond travel. Let there be somewhere safe at the end of this mad flight, some refuge where Caldwell could not reach her. The afternoon darkened into evening. The wind howled with increasing fury, rocking the carriage with violent gusts. Snow battered the windows with a sound like thrown sand. The temperature dropped steadily, and despite the fur blanket, despite her wool dress and cloak, Joanna began to shake with cold that went bone deep. She must have dozed fitfully at some point, exhaustion overwhelming even fear, because she woke with a start when the carriage lurched to an abrupt stop. But this was different from the earlier halt at the inn. The stop carried a sense of crisis, of something wrong. Outside, she heard the coachman's voice, sharp with concern. "My lord, I fear we can go no further tonight. The road ahead is completely obscured. We risk the horses if we continue in this darkness. The drifts are already 3 feet deep in places. How far to the next inn?" The Earl's voice was steady, but she detected a note of frustration beneath the calm. "At least 5 miles, my lord, and that's if we could see the road. In this storm, in this darkness, we could easily miss the turn entirely and end up stranded in open country." A long pause. Joanna could almost feel the Earl weighing options, none of them good. "Very well," he said finally. "We shall shelter in the carriage until first light. Build what fire you can in the lee of those trees. We have blankets and provisions enough to survive the night, though it will not be comfortable." The coachman departed to see to the horses and attempt to fire. Joanna heard the Earl moving above her, retrieving items from storage compartments. More blankets, she assumed, provisions for the unexpected delay. And then, With devastating inevitability, she felt his hand grasp the edge of the fur blanket that concealed her. Her breath stopped. Her heart seemed to cease beating entirely. The blanket lifted slowly, and suddenly Joanna found herself staring up into a pair of startled gray eyes set in a face of aristocratic angles and dark windswept hair. For a frozen moment, neither moved. Neither spoke. The wind shrieked around the carriage, and snow battered the windows. But inside that small space there was only shocked silence. Then the Earl's expression shifted from surprise to something harder, more dangerous. "Who?" he said with careful, controlled fury. "Are you? And what the devil are you doing in my carriage?" Joanna scrambled backward as much as the confined space allowed, her voice emerging as a desperate whisper. "Please, please, my lord, don't send me back. I'll die if you send me back. Please." The Earl's eyes narrowed, assessing her with the sharp attention of a man trained to evaluate threats. She could see his mind working, cataloging details, her obvious quality despite the dishevelment, her American accent, her genuine terror. "Explain yourself," he commanded, his voice dropping to a tone that brooked no argument. "Now, and it had better be the truth, because I have had quite enough of this storm, and my patience for unexpected complications is remarkably thin." So there, in a snowbound carriage miles from London with darkness falling and a blizzard raging outside, Joana Steinfeld began to speak, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush as she explained how she came to be hiding beneath the seat of Henry Stewart, Earl of Ravenscroft, a man whose Christmas journey to isolation had just become decidedly more complicated. Joanna's explanation came in gasps and fragments, her American accent thickening with each desperate word. She tried deception first, claimed to be a lady's companion fleeing improper advances from an employer's son, but the Earl's gray eyes sharpened with each inconsistency. "Stop," he commanded, holding up one gloved hand. "You are lying, and badly at that. A companion does not wear wool of this quality." He gestured to her dress. "Your hands have never known labor. Your speech suggests education far beyond what a hired companion would possess. Most tellingly, you carry yourself like someone accustomed to deference, not service." The wind screamed around the carriage, rocking it violently. Outside, she could hear the coachman struggling with the horses, cursing the storm in colorful terms. They were well and truly trapped, snowbound miles from anywhere, darkness falling, and nowhere to run even if she wanted to. "What is your name?" the Earl asked, his tone gentler now, as though he sensed her desperation. "Your real name." Joanna met his eyes and made a choice. Partial truth, at least. Joana Steinfeld. Miss Joana Steinfeld of New York. Recognition flickered across his features. "Steinfeld. The railroad fortune. My father's fortune, yes. He died 3 years ago building the very empire that now makes me valuable." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. $2 million, my lord. That's what I'm worth to the men hunting me. That's why I'm hiding in your carriage like a criminal instead of standing at an altar saying vows to a man who plans to have me declared insane by nightfall. The Earl went very still. "Explain." So she did. The words poured out. Her mother's remarriage, Lord Pembroke's guardianship, the betrothal to Viscount Caldwell announced without her consent. The bruises Caldwell left where no one could see them. His cold calculations. And finally, this morning's discovery. The intercepted telegram, the sanatorium arrangements, the physicians already paid to sign commitment papers. "Once I married him, I would disappear," Joanna said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to control it. "Locked away in some Devon institution while he controls my fortune. And eventually, when he secured everything properly, I suspect I would die there. Tragically, perhaps of the same hysteria that require my confinement." The Earl listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he sat back against the seat, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "Lord Pembroke," he said finally. "I know of him. A gambler, deep in debt to half of London. And Caldwell." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have heard whispers about Viscount Caldwell. Nothing substantiated, but rumors of cruelty, of wives who died under mysterious circumstances. Wives? Joanna's blood went cold. More than one. Two that I know of. Both American heiresses, now that I think on it. Both dead within 2 years of marriage. His gray eyes met hers with grim understanding. If what you say is true, Miss Steinfeld, you were right to run. Caldwell is a dangerous man. Then you believe me? She had not dared to hope for that. I believe you are genuinely frightened. I believe the basic facts of your account. He removed his gloves slowly, revealing strong hands marked with old scars. A soldier's hands, she realized. The question now is what to do about it. I cannot simply deposit you at the next inn. Caldwell will have men searching every coaching house between London and Scotland. I don't expect you to solve my problems, my lord. Joanna straightened her spine, summoning the pride her father had taught her. If you'll simply let me out at the next town, I can disappear. I have some money. Don't be absurd. You would freeze to death in this storm, assuming Caldwell's men didn't find you first. The Earl's tone was sharp with impatience. No, Miss Steinfeld, like it or not, you have made yourself my problem by invading my carriage. And I do not make a habit of abandoning young women to murderous fortune hunters, regardless of the inconvenience. Despite everything, the terror, the exhaustion, the bone-deep cold, Joanna felt a spark of hope. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you continue to Ravenscroft Hall as my guest. Yorkshire is remote, and my estate is not a place Caldwell would think to search immediately. It will buy us time to determine the best course of action. He studied her face in the dimming light. You have my word, Miss Steinfeld, that while you are under my protection, no harm will come to you. Neither Caldwell nor anyone else will lay hands on you. Is that understood? Why would you do this? The question escaped before she could stop it. You don't know me. I brought nothing but complications into your life. Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not quite identify. Perhaps I am tired of living a life governed entirely by what is proper and expected. Or perhaps I simply recognize in you a desperation I once felt myself when circumstances beyond my control threatened to destroy everything I held dear. Before she could respond, the coachman appeared at the window, snow-covered and shaking with cold. My lord, I've got a fire started, but it's a losing battle. The horses need proper shelter soon, or we'll lose them. The Earl made his decision with military efficiency. We push forward, not to the next inn. We'd never find it in this darkness. But there's a hunting lodge approximately 2 miles north. It belongs to the Duke of Thornbury, but he never uses it this time of year. We can shelter there until the storm passes. 2 miles in this weather, my lord. 2 miles, or freeze here. Those are options. We go now, while the horses still have strength. He turned to Joanna. You will sit here, properly visible. No more hiding. If we encounter anyone on this road, which we won't in this storm, you are my cousin traveling to Ravenscroft for Christmas. Is that clear? Joanna nodded, too grateful and exhausted to argue. The Earl rapped on the ceiling, and the carriage lurched back in emotion, fighting through drifts that threatened to stop them entirely. Joanna sat across from the Earl of Ravenscroft, watching him through the darkness as he stared out at the storm, his profile hard and determined. She had fled one prison and thrown herself on the mercy of a complete stranger. But somehow, against all reason, she felt safer in this snowbound carriage with Henry Stewart than she had felt in months under Lord Pembroke's guardianship. Outside, the storm raged on. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, Caldwell was surely organizing pursuit. But for this moment, in this small space of warmth and unexpected protection, Joanna Steinfeld allowed herself to believe that escape might truly be possible. Will Joanna find sanctuary at Ravenscroft Hall? Can Henry protect her from Caldwell's ruthless pursuit? And what happens when a marriage of convenience begins to feel like something more? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now to follow Joanna and Henry's journey from desperate escape to unexpected love. The 2 miles to the hunting lodge felt like 20. The carriage fought through drifts that reached the axles, lurching and sliding on the invisible road. More than once they stopped entirely, and Joanna heard the coachman and footman outside, digging with whatever implements they could find, coaxing the exhausted horses forward through sheer determination and profanity. Inside, the Earl produced a flask of brandy from his coat. "Drink," he commanded, pressing it into Joanna's trembling hands. "You're half frozen." She obeyed, the liquid burning down her throat, bringing blessed warmth that spread through her chest. "Thank you," she managed, her teeth still chattering. "For the brandy. For everything. Save your thanks until we reach shelter." But his tone had gentled considerably from the sharp anger of their first exchange. "Tell me, Miss Steinfeld, can you ride?" The question surprised her. "I can. My father believed all his children should be competent horsewomen." "Why?" "Because if this storm continues, we may need to abandon the carriage and go on horseback. Yorkshire weather is unpredictable and unforgiving." He studied her in the darkness. "You strike me as someone who does not quit easily. My father used to say that Steinfelds don't run from fights. We run toward solutions." Joanna's voice caught on the memory, though I suspect hiding in strange carriages wasn't quite what he had in mind. The ghost of a smile crossed the Earl's face. "I suspect not, though I imagine he would approve of your survival instinct." He paused, then asked quietly, "Your mother, she approved this match to Caldwell?" "My mother sees only that Caldwell is titled and charming in company. She doesn't see the coldness beneath, or chooses not to." Bitterness crept into Joanna's tone. "She remarried for security after my father died. I think she simply cannot conceive that her new connections would sell me like livestock. Yet your lady's maid saw the truth. Dorothy has been with me since New York. She loved my father, was loyal to him." Joanna's throat tightened. "She risked everything to warn me. If Hartford discovers she helped me escape, he'll dismiss her without reference. She has a sister in Cheapside, but at her age, without recommendations." She couldn't finish the thought. "Then we shall ensure she's provided for," the Earl said with quiet certainty. "Once you're safe, I'll see that your Dorothy wants for nothing." Before Joanna could respond, the carriage gave a final lurch and stopped. This time, the coachman's voice carried relief rather than frustration. "The lodge, my lord, just ahead through the trees." The Thornbury Hunting Lodge was a substantial stone structure, designed for ducal comfort even in remote locations. The Earl's men forced the door, locked but not barred, and within minutes had fires blazing in two hearths. The place was dusty from disuse but well stocked with firewood, and mercifully, the roof was sound. Joanna stood before the main hearth, her cloak steaming as warmth finally penetrated her frozen body. The Earl moved through the space with military efficiency, locating blankets stored in cedar chests, finding candles and oil for lamps, taking inventory of what provisions existed. "There's tinned meat, dried fruit, flour for bread if we're desperate," he reported. "The Duke keeps this place prepared for unexpected hunting parties. We could survive a week here if necessary, though I hope the storm breaks before then." "My lord," Joanna said quietly, watching him work, "I realize you're accustomed to Christmas at your own estate. Instead, you're snowbound in a stranger's hunting lodge with an uninvited American fugitive. I am truly sorry for disrupting your plans." The Earl stopped his inventory taking and turned to face her fully. In the firelight, his features were less severe than she'd initially thought. There was strength there, certainly, and a hardness born of loss, but also something else, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "My plans," he said slowly, "consisted of arriving at Ravenscroft Hall, dismissing my staff to their own celebrations, and spending Christmas alone in my study with account books and brandy. Not, I think, plans worth preserving." "Why alone?" The question escaped before propriety could stop it. "Forgive me, that was impertinent, but honest, which I'm beginning to suspect is your natural state." He moved closer to the fire, and in his face she saw old grief. "My parents died 3 years ago, Miss Steinfeld. Influenza, within days of each other. My sister married a Scottish laird and moved to Edinburgh. I inherited a title, estates, responsibilities, and an empty house. I told myself I preferred the solitude, that it was peace rather than loneliness." He met her eyes. "Perhaps we're both running from things, you and I. Yours is simply more immediate and dangerous." The intimacy of the moment, alone together in firelight, barriers falling, made Joanna's breath catch. This was dangerous in a different way than Caldwell's threats. This was the danger of connection, of finding understanding in the last place she expected. "My lord," she began, but he raised a hand. "If we're to be snowbound together, you should call me Henry. My lord becomes tedious after the 100th repetition." Henry. His name felt strange and right on her tongue. "Then you must call me Joanna." Joanna. He tested it, the American pronunciation careful in his British accent. "Very well. Now, Joanna, you should rest. My men will stand watch in rotation. Not that anyone could possibly travel in this storm, but I'll take no chances with your safety. Take the bedroom upstairs. I'll remain here by the fire." She wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. The terror of the morning, the hours cramped beneath the carriage seat, the cold and fear, it all demanded payment. "Thank you, Henry." She paused at the stairs. "For believing me, for protecting me, for not thinking me mad." "You're not mad." His voice was firm in the darkness. "You're trapped by laws written by men to control women and their fortunes. That's not madness. That's injustice. And I have some experience with fighting injustice." As Joanna climbed the stairs to a bedroom thick with dust, but blessedly warm, she heard Henry speaking quietly with his coachman below, discussing watch rotations and the storm's progression. His voice carried the calm authority of command, the certainty of someone accustomed to protecting those in his care. She had run from one man's control only to throw herself on another man's mercy. But somehow, inexplicably, this felt different. Henry had asked nothing of her, demanded nothing, expected nothing. He simply offered protection because it was right. Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury, as though winter itself were angry at her escape. But inside the hunting lodge, fires burned bright, and for the first time since reading that terrible telegram, Joana Steinfeld felt something beyond fear. She felt, against all logic and reason, safe. Joanna woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through frost-etched windows and the distant sound of church bells. Christmas Day. She should have been waking as Lady Caldwell this morning, trapped in a nightmare of legal bondage. Instead, she was free, snowbound but free, in a hunting lodge with a stranger who was becoming something more than a stranger. Downstairs, she found Henry already awake, examining the storm's aftermath through a window. Snow had piled against the lodge in magnificent drifts, transforming the landscape into an unmarred expanse of white. The world looked clean, untouched, full of possibility. "Good morning," Henry said, turning at her approach. "Merry Christmas, Joanna. I apologize for the modest accommodations and complete absence of proper breakfast. We have bread, dried apples, and tinned beef. Not quite what one expects for the holiday. It's the best Christmas breakfast I've ever had," she replied honestly, "because it's the first one in months where I haven't been terrified of what the day would bring." Something in his expression softened. "Then let us make the most of it. The storm has passed, but the roads won't be passable until tomorrow at earliest. We have today to plan our next moves." They ate by the fire, an oddly domestic scene. An earl and an heiress sharing tinned meat and hard bread as though it were a feast. The conversation flowed more easily than it had any right to, ranging from Joanna's childhood in New York to Henry's military service in India, from her father's railroad empire to his parents' last Christmas before the influenza took them. They loved this season, Henry said quietly, staring into the flames. "My mother would transform Ravenscroft Hall into something magical. After they died, I couldn't bear to continue the traditions. It felt like play acting a happiness." "My father loved Christmas too," Joanna replied. "He'd close his offices for a full week, insist his executives spend time with their families. He said a man who wouldn't stop building railroads for Christmas had lost sight of why he was building them in the first place." She smiled at the memory. Caldwell would have hated that philosophy. For him, everything is acquisition. People, money, power, it's all just assets to be controlled. The mention of Caldwell's name changed the atmosphere. Henry stood, pacing to the window. "We need to discuss your legal situation. You said Lord Hertford is your guardian until I marry or reach 25. 2 more years." The words tasted bitter. "Under British law, he controls where I live, whom I see, whom I marry. My father's fortune is held in trust, but Hertford has access to the income, generous income, for my maintenance and care. My stepfather arranged it when they moved to London, claimed it would be more proper to have a British guardian while they traveled for diplomatic service. And this trust, what happens to it upon your marriage? Control transfers to my husband." Joanna's hands clenched in her lap. "That's what makes me valuable to Caldwell. Once married, he'd have legal access to everything. The sanatorium plan just ensures I can't fight back or expose him." Henry was quiet for a long moment, his military mind clearly working through strategies. "There may be a solution," he said finally. "One that would protect you immediately and permanently." Before he could elaborate, the sound of horses outside made them both freeze. Henry moved swiftly to the window, his body tensing. "Riders," he said quietly. 3 of them, approaching from the south road. Joanna's heart stopped. "Caldwell's men. They found us already." "No." Henry's voice carried relief mixed with surprise. "I know that horse. The gray mare. That's Dorothy Brennan's doing. She must have hired a mount and followed our route." He turned to her with something like admiration. "Your maid is remarkably determined." Indeed, when the riders reached the lodge, Dorothy practically fell from her hired horse, her face raw with cold but fierce with purpose. Behind her came 2 men Joanna didn't recognize, rough-looking but respectful in their bearing. "Miss Joanna." Dorothy stumbled through the snow. Thank God you're safe." They brought her inside, pressed hot tea into her frozen hands, and only then did Dorothy produce the documents she'd carried wrapped in oilcloth against the weather. "I went back after you left," she said, her Irish accent thick with cold and emotion. "Went to Lord Pembroke's study while they were all at the church waiting for a bride who'd never arrive. Found these, miss. Evidence. Everything you need." The papers told a damning story. Letters between Caldwell and Pembroke, negotiating Joanna's price like livestock. Correspondence with Dr. Silas Grimshaw of Devon, discussing accommodation of a difficult patient requiring permanent discretion. Financial records showing Pembroke's £15,000 debt and Caldwell's payment. And most chilling, newspaper clippings about 2 American women who died in British private institutions within the past 3 years. One in Cornwall, one in Sussex. Both had been married to Lord Edmund Caldwell. "Sarah Morrison of Boston," Joanna read aloud, her voice shaking. "Died January 1876, age 24, of brain fever while receiving treatment for nervous hysteria. Survived by her husband, Viscount Caldwell." She looked up at Henry. "He's done this before. Twice before. And profited handsomely each time," Henry said grimly, examining the financial documents Dorothy had brought. Each woman brought substantial fortunes. Each died within 2 years of marriage, their estates passing to Caldwell. He's not just a fortune hunter. He's a murderer with a proven method. The 2 men with Dorothy introduced themselves as private investigators Henry had hired that morning, sending them from the nearest village before dawn when the storm broke. They'd encountered Dorothy on the road, recognized her description, and brought her to the lodge. "We've been tracking Caldwell's movements," the elder investigator said. "He left London this morning with a magistrate and 2 physicians. They're heading north, following reports of your carriage. They'll reach this area by tomorrow, possibly sooner if they push hard." Henry's jaw tightened. "Then we have less time than I hoped." He turned to Joanna, and in his gray eyes she saw decision forming. "There is a solution, one that would place you beyond Pembroke's guardianship and Caldwell's reach immediately." "What solution?" But even as she asked, understanding dawned. "Marriage," Henry said quietly. "To me, as my wife, you would no longer be under Pembroke's control. Your trust would transfer according to its terms, but as a married woman, you would have legal standing. Caldwell's claim would become invalid. The physician's papers worthless." Dorothy gasped. The investigators exchanged glances, and Joanna simply stared at Henry, unable to process what he was offering. You would sacrifice your freedom for me? Bind yourself to a woman you've known barely a day. I would prevent an injustice, Henry corrected, and perhaps remedy my own isolation in the process. I'm offering protection, Joanna, and partnership. A marriage of convenience, if you will, but I'm offering it freely, with full understanding of what it means. Outside, Christmas bells rang across the snowy Yorkshire countryside. Inside the hunting lodge, Joana Steinfeld faced the most important decision of her life. Trust this stranger who had shown her nothing but kindness, or face Caldwell's murderous scheme alone. She looked at the evidence spread before them, at Dorothy's worried face, at Henry's steady gray eyes. And she made her choice. "Then I accept," she said, her voice stronger than she felt, with gratitude and the promise that I will be a partner, not a burden. Henry's hand found hers, warm and solid. You could never be that. Christmas Day, 1878, would be remembered not for the wedding that didn't happen, but for the one that would, born of necessity, but carrying the seeds of something neither of them dared name yet, something that felt remarkably like hope. They departed the hunting lodge at first light on Boxing Day, the roads barely passable but navigable with determination. Henry's coachman drove with careful precision through snow-packed lanes while Joanna sat beside Henry in the carriage, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, or at least afraid of different things now. "Tell me about Ravenscroft Hall," she said, watching the Yorkshire landscape roll past in its winter majesty. "Stone in history," Henry replied. "Built in 1543, expanded by each generation. My grandfather added the east wing, my father the conservatory. It's too large for one man, really. 200 rooms, most of them closed and in use since my parents died." He paused. "It needs life again. Laughter. Purpose beyond simply existing. You speak as though the house is lonely. Perhaps it is. Or perhaps I'm projecting my own condition onto architecture." A ghost of a smile. "My sister tells me I've become morbid in my solitude. She may be right." They reached Ravenscroft Hall by mid-morning. The estate rose before them like something from a storybook. Ancient stone, tall windows, towers that spoke of centuries past. Snow draped everything in pristine white. Smoke curled from chimneys. And despite Henry's claims of loneliness, the place radiated a kind of waiting warmth, as though the house itself had been expecting them. The staff lined up in the entrance hall, clearly surprised by their master's unexpected return with guests. Mrs. Beatrice Dalton, the housekeeper, was a sturdy woman of perhaps 50 with kind eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Colchester, the butler, possessed the dignified bearing of one who had served the Stewart family for decades. "Mrs. Dalton, prepare the rose chamber for Miss Steinfeld," Henry instructed. "She is my guest and will be staying indefinitely. Dorothy Brennan will serve as her lady's maid. Ensure both are made comfortable." "Of course, my lord." Mrs. Dalton's sharp gaze moved between Henry and Joanna with obvious curiosity, but she asked no questions. "Welcome to Ravenscroft Hall, miss. If you'll follow me." The rose chamber was magnificent, all cream and gold, with a four-poster bed draped in silk, windows overlooking snow-covered gardens, and a warmth that seeped into Joanna's bones after days of cold and fear. Dorothy helped her into a borrowed dress, one of Henry's late mother's gowns, altered hastily by Mrs. Dalton's skilled hands. "He's a good man, miss," Dorothy said quietly, fastening the buttons. "The way he looks at you, it's not like how Caldwell looked at you. There's respect there. Kindness. We barely know each other, Dorothy. Sometimes that's when you see people most clearly, before history and habit cloud the view." Dorothy met her eyes in the mirror. "Your father would have liked him, I think. The Earl has that same quality, honor that isn't performative. It simply is." That evening, Henry summoned Joanna to the library, a magnificent room of leather and mahogany, walls lined with books that spoke of generations of learning. He stood by the fire with his solicitor, Mr. Harrison Pemberton, a precise man with spectacles and the bearing of someone who took law seriously. "Miss Steinfeld," Mr. Pemberton said after introductions. "His lordship has explained your circumstances. I've been researching the legal complexities all afternoon. And Joanna's heart hammered. Your situation is precarious. Lord Hertford remains your legal guardian until marriage or your 25th birthday. He could theoretically force your return to London and proceed with the Caldwell marriage, particularly if he secures medical testimony regarding your mental state. Mr. Pemberton's expression was grave. The law, I'm afraid, strongly favors male authority in such matters. However, Henry interjected, marriage to me would end Pembroke's guardianship immediately. As my wife, you would have legal standing. The trust your father established would transfer according to its terms, giving you control of your fortune as a married woman under both American and British law. I've drawn up the necessary documents, Mr. Pemberton continued. A marriage settlement that ensures your fortune remains under your control, unusual, but not unprecedented. His lordship has insisted upon terms that protect your interests entirely. Joanna looked at Henry in surprise. You would give me control of my own money? It's your money, Henry said simply. Your father earned it, intended it for you. I have no need of it and no desire to control what is rightfully yours. This marriage is for protection, Joanna, not profit. The ceremony can be performed tomorrow morning, Mr. Pemberton said. I've secured a special license. The Earl's chapel is prepared. With witnesses present, the marriage will be entirely legal and binding. Tomorrow. The word hung in the air like a bell's chime. Joanna's first wedding was supposed to have been 2 days ago, a nightmare of coercion and conspiracy. This second wedding would be by choice, to a man who asked nothing but offered everything. Very well, she heard herself say. Tomorrow, then. That night, Joanna stood at her window watching snow fall softly over Ravenscroft Gardens. Tomorrow she would marry a man she'd known for 3 days. It was madness. It was necessity. It was the only path that led to safety. But somewhere beneath the practical calculations, something else stirred. The memory of Henry's hand warm on hers. The way he listened when she spoke, truly listened as though her words mattered. The quiet strength in his presence that made her feel protected without feeling diminished. A knock at the connecting door startled her. Henry's voice came through. Joanna, may I speak with you for a moment? She opened the door to find him still dressed, his expression uncertain in a way she hadn't seen before. I wanted to make certain you understand, he said quietly. This marriage need only be what you wish it to be. Separate chambers, cordial distance. I will expect nothing from you beyond what you're comfortable providing. The ceremony is a legal protection, nothing more, unless you wish it to be otherwise. The vulnerability in his words touched something deep within her. And what do you wish it to be, Henry? I wish, he said slowly, choosing each word with care, for you to be safe, for you to be free, for you to have the life your father would have wanted for you. Beyond that, he met her eyes. I find myself hoping that perhaps this arrangement of convenience might become something more genuine. But there is no pressure, no expectation. You have my word. Joanna stepped closer, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his gray eyes. I'm terrified, she admitted. Not of you, but of trusting anyone after Caldwell, after Pembroke's betrayal. Yet somehow, when I'm with you, the fear is less. Then that's enough, Henry said. We'll build from there, if we build at all. One day at a time. The next morning dawned clear and cold. In Ravenscroft's ancient chapel, with Dorothy, Mrs. Dalton, and Mr. Colchester as witnesses, Joana Steinfeld became Lady Ravenscroft. Henry's mother's wedding ring slid onto her finger, resized hastily, but fitting perfectly, as though it had always belonged there. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Henry's kiss was gentle, respectful, charged with possibility, but demanding nothing. As they walked back to the house through crystalline snow, Joanna's hand tucked into Henry's arm, she felt the strangest sensation. Not the triumph of escape, though that was certainly present. Not relief, though that too coursed through her. She felt, improbably, like she was coming home. But their victory is about to be tested. Caldwell is closing in with corrupt physicians and forged commitment papers. Can Henry and Joanna's brand new marriage survive the Christmas Day siege that's coming? Will their protection become something deeper when danger forces them to trust each other completely? Subscribe now to see how this snowbound romance explodes into a battle for Joanna's freedom. In her heart, they came on the morning of December 27th, 3 carriages rolling through the snow-covered drive like a funeral procession. Joanna watched from the library window, her new wedding band heavy on her finger, as the vehicles discharged their occupants. Lord Pembroke, red-faced and furious even from a distance. Viscount Caldwell, moving with predatory grace despite the cold. 2 men in dark coats carrying leather cases, physicians undoubtedly, and a portly gentleman in official robes whom she recognized as Sir Arnold Fletcher, the magistrate from Leeds. "Henry," she whispered, though he was already beside her, his hand finding hers. "I see them." His voice was calm, controlled, the military officer preparing for battle. "Remember what we discussed. You're a Lady Ravenscroft now. They have no claim on you, no authority over you. Stay beside me, speak when spoken to, and trust that I will not let them take you." They received their visitors in the great hall, a cavernous space of stone and timber that had witnessed centuries of Stuart authority. Henry had positioned himself deliberately, standing on the raised dais where his ancestors had held court, Joanna at his side, Mr. Colchester, and 2 footmen flanking them. A display of power, subtle but unmistakable. Ravenscroft, Hertford blustered, stomping snow from his boots with no regard for the ancient floors. "What is the meaning of this? You have kidnapped my ward, spirited her away from her lawful guardian." "I have done no such thing," Henry interrupted, his voice cutting through Pembroke's bluster like a blade through silk. "Lady Ravenscroft came to me of her own accord, fleeing circumstances she found intolerable. As my wife, she is no longer your concern." "Wife?" Caldwell's voice was silk over steel, his cold eyes fixing on Joanna with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Impossible. Lord Hertford did not consent to any marriage." "As her guardian?" "As her former guardian," Henry corrected. "Miss Steinfeld was 27, well past the age requiring consent for marriage. The ceremony was entirely legal, properly witnessed, and registered. Mr. Pemberton, if you would." The solicitor stepped forward with documents. "The marriage was performed yesterday morning in the Ravenscroft chapel. Here is the license, the register, and the settlement, all in perfect legal order." Sir Fletcher, the magistrate, examined the papers with professional thoroughness. "These appear legitimate, Lord Pembroke. If the ceremony was proper, the woman is mad." Caldwell's composure cracked slightly. "That's why we're here, Fletcher. She fled her own wedding in a state of hysteria, has clearly deluded the Earl with wild fantasies. Dr. Grimshaw and Dr. Hayes have examined her case thoroughly." He gestured to the 2 physicians, who stepped forward with matching leather cases. Dr. Silas Grimshaw was a thin man with restless hands and eyes that wouldn't quite meet anyone's directly. "We have prepared a comprehensive evaluation," he announced, producing papers with elaborate seals. "Miss Steinfeld," Lady Ravenscroft, Henry corrected coldly, "suffers from acute hysteria, delusions of persecution, and paranoid fantasies regarding those closest to her. She requires immediate institutionalization for her own protection and the safety of others." "Fascinating," Henry said, his tone glacial. "Tell me, Doctor, when did you examine my wife?" Grimshaw faltered. The evaluation was based on extensive testimony from Lord Hertford and Viscount Caldwell, who know her intimately. "So you never met her, never spoke to her, never examined her in any capacity whatsoever." Henry's words fell like hammer blows. "Yet you've diagnosed acute hysteria and recommend permanent confinement. How very thorough." The symptoms were clearly described by men who had financial incentive to see her declared incompetent. Henry nodded to Mr. Pemberton, who produced a different set of documents. "Sir Fletcher, perhaps you'd care to examine these. Financial records showing Lord Pembroke's gambling debts, £15,000, paid in full by Viscount Caldwell 6 months ago. The exact timing of Miss Steinfeld's betrothal announcement. Curious coincidence, wouldn't you say?" Pembroke's face went purple. How dare you? There's more. Henry continued relentlessly. Letters between Caldwell and Dr. Grimshaw, discussing arrangements for a difficult patient requiring permanent discretion. Correspondence with a private sanatorium in Devon, dated 3 weeks ago. And most interesting of all, he produced newspaper clippings with careful precision. Accounts of 2 previous American heiresses who died in British private institutions. Sarah Morrison of Boston, died January 1876. Catherine Vandermeer of Philadelphia, died March 1877. Both were married to Lord Edmund Caldwell. Both died within 2 years of marriage, their substantial fortunes passing entirely to their grieving widower. The silence in the great hall was absolute. "These are lies," Caldwell said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Fabrications designed to what? Prevent you from murdering a third wealthy American woman." Henry's composure finally cracked into cold fury. "You have a pattern, Caldwell. Marry heiresses, have them committed on false diagnoses, control their fortunes, and eventually arrange their convenient deaths. Sarah Morrison died of brain fever. Catherine van der Meer of apoplexy. Both diagnoses signed by physicians you paid generously. Both women silenced before they could expose you." Sir Fletcher was examining the newspaper clippings with growing alarm. "These are serious allegations, Lord Ravenscroft. They're provable facts. I have investigators gathering additional evidence as we speak. Financial records showing transfers of funds from both women's estates to Caldwell's accounts. Testimony from servants who witnessed suspicious circumstances." Henry turned to Joanna. "But perhaps we should hear from my wife herself. Lady Ravenscroft, would you describe for Sir Fletcher what you discovered on Christmas Eve morning?" Joanna stepped forward, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "I found a telegram meant for Viscount Caldwell. It read, 'Sanatorium prepared. Physicians arranged. Transfer immediate post-ceremony.' My maid, Dorothy Brennan, had intercepted it along with letters discussing my permanent confinement and payment to these very physicians standing before you. I realized I was not being married, Sir Fletcher. I was being sold and sentenced to institutional imprisonment so Caldwell could steal my inheritance." The ravings of a disturbed mind, Grimshaw began. "Does she sound disturbed to you?" Henry demanded. "Look at her, Fletcher. Listen to her. Clear recollection of specific facts, rational explanation of events, coherent understanding of her circumstances. Does this present as acute hysteria?" The magistrate studied Joanna carefully. "Lady Ravenscroft, can you tell me today's date and your current location?" "December 27th, 1878. Ravenscroft Hall, Yorkshire. I am perfectly aware of my circumstances, sir. I fled an arranged marriage to a man who intended to have me institutionalized so he could control my father's railroad fortune. $2 million that would have passed to Caldwell's control upon our marriage." Fletcher turned to Grimshaw. "You diagnosed this woman without examination, based solely on testimony from men who would profit financially from her confinement. The symptoms were clearly described by those who—" "This is outrageous." Caldwell's mask slipped entirely, revealing the predator beneath. "The woman belongs to me. The betrothal was legal, the guardianship proper. The betrothal is void," Henry said with finality. "She is my wife. Your claim is worthless. And these," he gestured to the forged commitment papers, "are fraudulent documents prepared by corrupt physicians for the purpose of illegal confinement. Sir Fletcher, I strongly suggest these matters warrant formal investigation." The magistrate's expression had hardened considerably. "I'm inclined to agree. Dr. Grimshaw, Dr. Hayes, you will surrender those papers and accompany me back to Leeds for questioning. Lord Caldwell, I suggest you remain available for further inquiry into these allegations regarding your previous wives." "This is absurd," Caldwell began, but Fletcher cut him off. "2 women are dead, my lord. Both connected to you, both wealthy, both dying under suspicious circumstances. That demands investigation." He turned to Henry. "Lord Ravenscroft, you have my apologies for this intrusion. Your marriage appears entirely legitimate, and your wife shows no signs of mental instability whatsoever." As Fletcher and his party departed, taking the physicians with them, Hartford made one last desperate attempt. "Joanna, please. This is madness. Come back to London. We'll sort this properly." "I am Lady Ravenscroft," Joanna said quietly, her hand finding Henry's. "I am staying with my husband. You have no authority over me, uncle. You never truly cared for my welfare, only for how my fortune could solve your gambling debts. I suggest you leave Yorkshire and pray that I choose not to pursue legal action for your role in this conspiracy." When the last carriage finally disappeared down the snow-covered drive, Joanna felt her legs give way. Henry caught her, his arms strong and steady. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe. They can't touch you now." And for the first time in 8 months, Joana Steinfeld, Lady Ravenscroft now, allowed herself to believe it was true. The days following Caldwell's defeat settled into a strange rhythm. Henry and Joanna moved through Ravenscroft Hall like polite strangers who happened to share a surname, maintaining the careful formality they'd agreed upon. Separate chambers, cordial meals, conversations that skated across safe topics, the weather, estate business, books they'd read, never venturing into deeper waters. It was driving them both quietly mad. Joanna threw herself into learning the duties of a countess, spending hours with Mrs. Dalton reviewing household accounts, charitable obligations, tenant concerns. She met with the vicar's wife about the village school, approved menus, inspected linens, and performed every task expected of Lady Ravenscroft with American efficiency that both impressed and slightly scandalized the staff. But at night, alone in the Rose Chamber, she lay awake listening to the house settle, aware that Henry was just beyond the connecting door. So close, so impossibly distant. Henry buried himself in estate correspondence, rode out in bitter cold to inspect tenant farms, spent long evenings in his study with account books and brandy. He told himself he was giving Joanna space, allowing her time to adjust to marriage and safety after months of terror. He was lying to himself. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He was falling in love with his wife, and he had no idea how to tell her without breaking their careful agreement. Mrs. Dalton watched them both with knowing eyes. "Begging your pardon, my lord," she said one afternoon as Henry attempted to focus on correspondence, "but you're making both yourself and her ladyship miserable." "I beg your pardon?" Henry looked up sharply. "You heard me, my lord. You circle each other like nervous horses, both wanting to close the distance but too afraid to take the step." She set down the tea tray with more force than necessary. "Your mother would have boxed your ears for such foolishness. Life is short. Happiness is rare. And you have a chance at both if you'd stop being so damnably noble about it." After she departed, leaving Henry stunned by the unprecedented lecture, he sat staring at the fire, her words echoing in his mind. That evening at dinner, the tension was palpable. They sat at opposite ends of the long dining table, an acre of polished mahogany between them, making stilted conversation about the snow melting in the southern fields. "This is ridiculous," Joanna said suddenly, setting down her fork with a sharp clink. Henry looked up, startled. "I beg your pardon?" Us, performing this pantomime of polite distance. She stood abruptly, her American directness breaking through British restraint. "Henry, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot sit across empty space from you and pretend I don't notice how you look at me when you think I'm not watching. I cannot sleep behind that locked door, knowing you're just beyond it. And I cannot keep acting as though this marriage is merely a legal convenience when it stopped being that the moment you chose to believe me instead of turning me over to Caldwell." Henry rose as well, his heart hammering. "Joanna, no, let me finish." She moved around the table toward him. "I know what we agreed. Separate chambers, no expectations, a marriage of protection only. But I find myself wanting more than protection. I want partnership. I want conversation that goes deeper than weather reports. She stopped directly before him, close enough that he could smell the lavender in her hair. "I want you, Henry, not the Earl of Ravenscroft. You, the man who pulled back that blanket and chose kindness over anger. The man who listened when I spoke and believed me when no one else would." Henry's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his gray eyes. "Do you know how terrified I've been? not of Caldwell or magistrates or any external threat. Terrified of this, of feeling something real for someone again. My first marriage was cordial but cold. I convinced myself I was enough, that duty and respect were all one could expect. Then you appeared in my carriage, fierce and frightened and absolutely extraordinary, and I realized I'd been lying to myself for years about what was possible. Then stop lying, Joanna whispered. Stop pretending this is only practical. I cannot promise perfection, Henry said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I've spent 3 years in isolation. I may not always find the right words. I may fail at romance because I've had so little practice at genuine feeling. And I come with a lifetime of distrust, Joanna countered. Caldwell taught me to fear manipulation. Hartford showed me how family can betray. I may need reassurance when doubt creeps in. I may struggle with vulnerability because independence has kept me alive. Then we shall be imperfect together, Henry decided, echoing words he'd once spoken in a hunting lodge during a snowstorm. We shall make mistakes and learn as we go. He kissed her then, not the chaste brush of lips from their wedding ceremony, but a kiss that spoke of suppressed longing and careful walls finally crumbling. Joanna's arms wound around his neck, and for the first time since their hasty marriage, they allowed themselves to feel the full weight of what was building between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. I should escort you to your chamber, he said, though his arms remained firmly around her waist. Or, Joanna said softly, I could come to yours. The question hung in the air between them, the final barrier, the last wall waiting to fall. Are you certain? Henry asked. Once we cross this threshold. I'm tired of thresholds, Joanna interrupted. I'm tired of waiting and wondering and holding back. I want to move forward, Henry. With you. Fully. Completely. No more locked doors between us. Henry took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and led her from the dining room. They climbed the stairs in silence, but it was no longer the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was the charged quiet of two people who had finally stopped fighting what they both wanted. In Henry's chambers, with firelight painting everything in gold, they discovered each other slowly, tenderly, with the careful attention of two people who had been alone too long and were determined to be alone no longer. Later, as Joanna lay in Henry's arms, her head resting on his chest, she felt his lips press against her hair. I love you, he murmured. I probably have since you glared at me from beneath that carriage seat and demanded I not send you back. Certainly since you stood before Caldwell with such courage. But definitely, absolutely, undeniably since this moment right now. Joanna tilted her face up to meet his eyes. I love you too, my accidental savior, my unexpected husband, my home. Outside, snow began to fall again over Ravenscroft Hall, soft and steady. But inside, in the Earl's chambers, two people who had been running from loneliness finally stopped running. They had found each other in the most unexpected way, through fear and flight and a Christmas Eve snowstorm. But they had chosen each other freely, completely, with full hearts and open eyes. And that, they both knew, made all the difference. December 24th, 1879. 1 year to the day since Joana Steinfeld had fled a wedding in terror and hidden in a stranger's carriage. Ravenscroft Hall blazed with light and life. Every window glowed with candles. Every doorway was draped with greenery, and the sound of laughter and music drifted through rooms that had been silent for too long. The annual Christmas ball, a tradition Henry's mother had cherished and Henry had abandoned after her death, had been magnificently revived. Joanna stood in the ballroom, one hand resting on her swollen belly, greeting guests with the confidence of a woman who had found exactly where she belonged. The green silk gown had been specially made to accommodate her 7-month pregnancy and the emeralds at her throat. Henry's first anniversary gift caught the candlelight with every movement. You're radiant, Dorothy whispered, adjusting Joanna's shawl. The former lady's maid was now head of household staff, a promotion she'd accepted with tears and fierce loyalty. Your father would be so proud, miss, my lady. He would have liked Henry, Joanna said softly, watching her husband across the room as he conversed with the vicar. They shared the same quality, strength that didn't need to prove itself through domination. The past year had transformed both of them. Henry had emerged from isolation, reopening Ravenscroft to society, re-establishing the charitable works his parents had championed, even reconciling with his sister who had traveled from Scotland for the ball. Joanna had thrown herself into modernizing the estate's operations, applying American business principles to centuries-old traditions with results that had impressed even the most traditional Yorkshire families. But more than that, they had transformed each other. Henry's careful reserve had melted under Joanna's directness. Her distrust had dissolved in the face of his steady devotion. They had built something neither had dared hope for, a partnership rooted in respect, warmed by affection, and deepened by genuine love. "Ladies and gentlemen," the orchestra master announced, "the Earl and Countess of Ravenscroft will open the dancing with a waltz." Henry materialized at Joanna's side, offering his arm with a smile that still made her heart flutter. "May I have this dance, Lady Ravenscroft?" "You may, Lord Ravenscroft. Though I warn you, I'm considerably less graceful than I was last Christmas." "You're perfect," he murmured as they took their positions. "Exactly as you are." The music began, and they moved together with the ease of a year's practice. But halfway through the waltz, Henry did something unprecedented. He stopped in the center of the floor, still holding Joanna's hand, and addressed their assembled guests. "My friends, if I might have your attention." The ballroom quieted, curious faces turning toward them. "1 year ago tonight, I was traveling alone to this house, intending to spend Christmas in isolation. I believed I preferred solitude, that duty and quiet were sufficient for a life. Then I discovered an unexpected passenger in my carriage. The guests laughed, the story having become legendary in Yorkshire society. And everything changed." He turned to Joanna, his gray eyes warm with love. "You were hiding beneath my carriage seat, terrified and desperate. But what I didn't know then was that you weren't just running from danger. You were running toward the life you deserved. And somehow, impossibly, that life included me." Joanna's eyes filled with tears as he continued. "You transformed this house from a mausoleum of memories into a home. You reminded me what it meant to laugh, to hope, to feel. You gave me purpose beyond simply existing." His hand moved to rest gently on her belly. "And soon, you'll give me the greatest gift of all, a family, a future, a reason to greet each morning with joy rather than mere duty." The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers. Joanna, laughing and crying simultaneously, rose on her toes to kiss him, propriety abandoned in favor of genuine emotion. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My accidental Earl, my Christmas miracle. And I love you, my brave American who had the courage to run toward the unknown." As the orchestra resumed and other couples joined them on the floor, Joanna caught sight of Dorothy watching from the doorway, tears streaming down her weathered face. She saw Mrs. Dalton beaming with satisfaction, saw Mr. Colchester discreetly wiping his eyes, saw all the staff who had helped make this Christmas celebration possible, who had welcomed an American stranger and made her Lady Ravenscroft in deed as well as title. Later that night, when the guests had departed and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Henry and Joanna stood at their bedroom window, watching snow begin to fall. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Joanna asked. "Christmas Eve last year, when you found me under your seat?" "Every day," Henry admitted. "I think about how close I came to simply depositing you at that inn. How easily I might have missed this, us, if I'd chosen differently. But you didn't choose differently. You chose kindness when you could have chosen anger. Protection when you could have chosen indifference. Love when you could have chosen isolation." Joanna leaned into his embrace. "You gave me everything I'd lost: safety, freedom, family, home." "You gave me those same things," Henry countered. "I was just as lost as you were, Joanna, just lost in a different way." The baby kicked vigorously, and they both laughed as Henry's hand found the movement. "He's impatient," Joanna said, "just like his mother. Or she's determined, like both her parents." They stood together in the falling snow, watching the world turn white again. 1 year ago, Joanna had fled into a blizzard with nothing but terror and desperate hope. Now she stood in warmth and safety, carrying new life, beloved by a man who saw her not as property or prize, but as partner and equal. "Merry Christmas, Henry," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, my love." The first of many. Outside, church bells rang across the Yorkshire countryside, welcoming Christmas Day. Inside Ravenscroft Hall, the Earl and Countess stood embraced at the window, two people who had found each other in the storm and chosen to build a life together in its aftermath. Sometimes the only way to escape a prison is to run toward the unknown. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the unknown runs toward you as well, in the form of a snowbound carriage, a patient Earl, and a love neither of you saw coming, but both of you needed more than breath itself. Their son was born in March 1880, named William for Joanna's father. He grew up hearing the story of how his mother hid in his father's carriage on Christmas Eve, how courage and kindness had transformed fear into love, and how the bravest thing anyone could do was choose hope even when the storm seemed endless. And every Christmas Eve, as snow fell over Ravenscroft Hall, the Earl and Countess would stand at that same window, remembering the night everything changed, grateful beyond measure for a blizzard, a carriage, and a magnificent accident that brought them home to each other. Did you love Joanna and Henry's journey from desperate escape to true love? From hiding beneath a carriage seat to standing as equals in their own home? From Christmas terror to Christmas triumph? This is what happens when you subscribe. You get complete, satisfying love stories that honor both passion and partnership, where heroines are brave and heroes are kind, where happy endings are earned through courage and choice. Want more Victorian romances? More snowbound lovers? More marriages that start as protection and become profound love? Hit that subscribe button now and join thousands of readers who refuse to settle for anything less than stories that make their hearts soar.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!